The rain battered Eleanor Hawthorne's mansion like a vengeful ghost, each drop a reminder of promises broken. At 96, she sat alone in her velvet-lined study, her frail hands clutching a letter that trembled not from age but from fury. Betrayed by the one man she trusted most, her lawyer, she was about to unleash a truth that would shatter his world. Eleanor had lived a life most could only dream of. Born into wealth, widowed young, and childless, she'd built an empire of philanthropy and quiet power. Her mansion, perched on a cliff overlooking the stormy Atlantic, was a monument to her resilience. But now, as thunder roared, she felt the sting of betrayal sharper than any storm. Her lawyer, Marcus Vane, had been her confidant for decades. Charming, meticulous, and silver-tongued, he'd managed her estate with a precision she admired. Yet, beneath his polished exterior, he'd been siphoning her fortune, forging documents to divert millions to offshore accounts. She'd discovered it by chance: a misplaced email, a careless signature on a form she'd never seen. The realization hit like a blade. Marcus, the man she'd treated like a son, had betrayed her. Her fingers traced the letter on her desk, its ink still fresh. It wasn't just a letter. It was a weapon, meticulously crafted to expose Marcus's deceit. She'd spent weeks gathering evidence: bank statements, forged contracts, even recordings of his smug voice dismissing her as too old to notice. Eleanor's heart ached, not for the money, but for the trust she'd lost. At 96, she'd thought herself immune to such pain, but betrayal, she learned, cut deeper with age. The storm outside intensified, mirroring the turmoil within her. She remembered the first time she met Marcus, fresh out of law school, his eyes bright with ambition. She'd seen potential in him, a spark she nurtured with mentorship and trust. Over the years, he'd become her rock, handling her charities, her investments, even her personal correspondence. She'd invited him to dinners in this very mansion, where they'd laughed over wine and debated the future of her foundation. How had it come to this? As she sealed the letter, a memory surfaced: her late husband, James, teaching her to play chess. "Always think 3 moves ahead, Ellie," he'd said. She'd lived by that rule, outsmarting competitors and skeptics who doubted a woman's place in business. Now, she'd use it one last time. The letter wasn't just for Marcus, it was for the world. She'd send copies to the press, her foundation's board, and the State Bar Association. Marcus's career, his pristine reputation would crumble under the weight of her words. But doubt crept in. Was she being too harsh? Marcus had a family, a wife and 2 daughters who adored him. Destroying him would ripple outward, hurting them too. Eleanor's eyes drifted to a photo on her desk. Her and James, young and in love, before the world taught her how cruel it could be. She wondered if James would approve of this vengeance. Her heart said no, but her mind screamed for justice. A knock at the door jolted her. It was Clara, her housekeeper of 20 years, her face etched with concern. "Mrs. Hawthorne, it's late. You should rest." Clara's voice was soft, but her eyes lingered on the letter. She'd seen Eleanor's distress these past weeks, though she didn't know the full story. "Clara," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Tomorrow, I need you to mail this. No questions. Just promise me." Clara nodded, her loyalty unwavering. As Clara left, Eleanor leaned back, the weight of her decision settling in. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person Marcus might betray next. Her wealth had given her power, but her age had given her clarity. She'd spent a lifetime building something good: hospitals, schools, shelters. She wouldn't let Marcus's greed tarnish that legacy. The storm raged on, but Eleanor felt a strange calm. The letter was her checkmate, her final move in a game she hadn't chosen to play. She closed her eyes, picturing Marcus's face when the truth hit: shock, then panic, then ruin. It wasn't joy she felt, but resolve. At 96, she was still a force, and she'd prove it. Morning broke over the cliffside mansion, the storm's fury replaced by an eerie stillness. Eleanor Hawthorne sat at her breakfast table, the letter now in Clara's hands, destined for the post office. She sipped her tea, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment she'd decided to end Marcus Vane's career. The weight of her choice pressed harder now in the daylight. She'd always prided herself on fairness, on giving second chances. Had she been too quick to judge? Her thoughts were interrupted by a new figure entering her life. Daniel, a young journalist who'd been hounding her for an interview about her philanthropy. He'd arrived unannounced, his earnest eyes and rumpled jacket a stark contrast to Marcus's polished suits. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, standing in her foyer, "I know you don't do interviews, but your work's inspired me. I just want to tell your story." Eleanor hesitated. She'd always shunned the spotlight, letting her deeds speak for themselves. But something in Daniel's sincerity stirred her. Maybe it was the way he reminded her of James' idealistic, unafraid to chase truth. She invited him in, and over tea, she found herself opening up not about Marcus, but about her life. She spoke of her childhood in a small town, her rise in a man's world, the loneliness of wealth. Daniel listened, scribbling notes, his admiration palpable. As they talked, a twist emerged. Daniel revealed he'd been investigating a string of financial scams targeting elderly philanthropists. "I've heard whispers about your lawyer, Marcus Vane," he said cautiously. "Nothing concrete, but something's off." Eleanor's heart skipped. She hadn't expected an ally, let alone one so young and untested. She kept her composure, deflecting his questions about Marcus, but her mind raced. Could Daniel's investigation amplify her letter's impact? Or would it complicate her carefully laid plan? She decided to trust him, but only partially. "Keep digging, Daniel," she said, her voice firm. "But don't mention my name." "Not yet." He nodded, sensing the gravity of her words. As he left, promising to follow up, Eleanor felt a spark of hope. Maybe this wasn't just her fight anymore. That afternoon, Clara returned, her face pale. "The letter's mailed, Mrs. Hawthorne. But I saw Marcus's car in town. He was with a man I didn't recognize, and they looked nervous." Eleanor's pulse quickened. Was Marcus onto her? Had someone tipped him off? She thanked Clara and retreated to her study, her resolve hardening. She began drafting a second letter, this one to her foundation's board, detailing Marcus's betrayal with even more evidence she'd uncovered: emails, bank records, even a voice memo where he mocked her as senile. As she wrote, memories flooded back. Marcus at her side during a hospital opening, his smile warm as he praised her vision. Had it all been a lie? The thought twisted her gut, but she pushed on, her pen a blade carving out justice. She'd built her empire on trust, but she'd learned trust could be a weakness. Now, her strength lay in action. Daniel called that evening, his voice urgent. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I found something. Marcus has ties to a shell company in the Caymans. It's linked to your foundation's funds." Eleanor's breath caught. This was bigger than she'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just stealing from her, was undermining everything she'd built. She thanked Daniel, promising to stay in touch, and hung up, her mind spinning. Alone in her study, Eleanor realized the stakes had shifted. Her letter would ruin Marcus, but Daniel's investigation could expose a larger web of deceit. She felt a surge of purpose, tempered by fear. At 96, she was no longer just a betrayed widow. She was a warrior, wielding truth as her weapon. But the cost of this fight, her health, her peace, loomed large. Could she endure it? Eleanor Hawthorne's mansion felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in with the weight of her mission. Her letter was out in the world, a ticking bomb set to detonate Marcus Vane's career. But as she sat in her study, surrounded by decades of memories, she wondered if justice would feel as sweet as she'd imagined. Daniel's investigation had added a new layer of complexity. His call last night had confirmed her worst fears. Marcus wasn't acting alone. The shell company in the Caymans linked to a network of lawyers and accountants, all profiting off vulnerable philanthropists like her. Eleanor felt a chill. She'd thought this was personal, a single betrayal. Now, it was a conspiracy, and she was at its center. A new figure entered the fray, Margaret, Marcus's wife, who arrived at the mansion unannounced. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying. "Eleanor, please," she pleaded, standing in the foyer. "I know what Marcus did. I found papers in his office." "I didn't know." The twist hit Eleanor like a wave. Margaret wasn't just a bystander. She was a victim too, trapped by her husband's greed. Eleanor invited her in, torn between pity and suspicion. Over coffee, Margaret poured out her story. She'd married Marcus young, dazzled by his charm. But over the years, she'd seen glimpses of his darker side: late-night calls, secret meetings, a growing distance. When she confronted him about the papers, he dismissed her, saying it was business she wouldn't understand. Margaret's voice broke as she admitted she'd come to warn Eleanor. "He knows about your letter," she whispered. "He's desperate. He might do something reckless." Eleanor's heart pounded. Marcus, cornered, was dangerous. She thanked Margaret, promising to be careful, but inside, she was reeling. Margaret's confession shifted her perspective. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about protecting others from Marcus's web. She thought of James again, his chessboard wisdom. Anticipate your opponent's moves. Marcus might try to discredit her, paint her as a confused old woman. She'd need to act fast. That afternoon, Eleanor met with Daniel in secret at a cafe in town. He brought a dossier, pages of transactions, emails, and names tied to Marcus's scheme. "This could bring down more than just Marcus," Daniel said, his eyes alight with purpose. "But we need your story to make it stick." Eleanor hesitated. Going public meant exposing her vulnerability, her trust in Marcus, to the world. At 96, she'd guarded her privacy fiercely. But the alternative, letting Marcus escape, was unthinkable. She agreed to let Daniel publish her story, but only after her letter reached its destinations. The press, the board, the bar association, they'd all receive her meticulously crafted exposé. She'd also added a personal touch, a note to Marcus, not in the letter but in her heart, forgiving him not for his sake, but for hers. Hate, she realized, was too heavy a burden at her age. As days passed, tension mounted. Clara reported seeing strange cars near the mansion, and Eleanor's phone buzzed with cryptic messages from unknown numbers. She felt hunted, but she refused to cower. She spent her nights refining her foundation's future, ensuring her legacy would outlive Marcus's betrayal. Daniel, meanwhile, worked tirelessly, his articles gaining traction online. The world was starting to notice. One evening, as Eleanor sat by her window, watching the Atlantic's restless waves, she felt a pang of exhaustion. Her body was frail, her heart heavy with the fight. But she thought of Margaret, of Daniel, of the countless others Marcus might hurt. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for them. Her resolve hardened, a fire kindled by a lifetime of resilience. The day Eleanor Hawthorne's letter hit the world, the Atlantic seemed to hold its breath. News outlets blazed with headlines. Philanthropist, 96, exposes lawyer's multi-million-dollar fraud. Marcus Vane's name was everywhere, his polished image shattered by Eleanor's meticulous evidence. She sat in her study, watching the chaos unfold on her tablet, her heart a mix of triumph and sorrow. The letter had done its work. The press devoured her story, printing her words verbatim. The forged contracts, the offshore accounts, the voice memos where Marcus mocked her. The State Bar Association launched an immediate investigation, and her foundation's board froze all transactions linked to Marcus. Daniel's articles, published in tandem, revealed the broader conspiracy, naming accomplices who now faced scrutiny. Eleanor's name became a symbol of courage, her age no longer a footnote, but a testament to her strength. Yet victory came at a cost. Marcus, desperate, tried to fight back. He gave interviews, claiming Eleanor was senile, her accusations the ravings of a lonely old woman. But the evidence was ironclad, and public opinion turned against him. Eleanor watched one of his interviews, his face pale, his charm gone. She felt no joy, only a hollow ache. She'd trusted him, believed in him. That loss stung more than the money. Margaret called, her voice trembling. "He's left us, Eleanor." Took what he could and ran. Eleanor's heart broke for her. She offered Margaret support, even inviting her and her daughters to stay at the mansion. Margaret declined, too proud, but promised to keep in touch. Eleanor admired her resilience, seeing echoes of her younger self. Daniel, now a friend as much as an ally, visited often. He brought news of the investigation's progress and shared stories of others inspired by Eleanor's stand. "You've started a movement," he said, his eyes bright. "People are checking their own trusts, their own lawyers." Eleanor smiled, but her body was tiring. At 96, each day felt borrowed, her energy spent on this final battle. One evening, as she walked the mansion's halls, Eleanor stopped at a portrait of James. She spoke to him, as she often did, asking if she'd done the right thing. The silence answered, but she felt his presence, his pride. She'd played her 3 moves ahead, and she'd won. But the game wasn't over. Her foundation needed new leadership. Her legacy needed safeguarding. She began drafting plans, her pen steady despite her frail hands. Clara, ever loyal, noticed Eleanor's fatigue. "You've done enough, Mrs. Hawthorne," she said softly. "Rest now." But Eleanor couldn't. Not yet. She wrote one final letter, not to Marcus, but to the future. It outlined her vision for her foundation, emphasizing trust, integrity, and compassion. She entrusted it to Daniel, asking him to ensure it reached the right hands. As weeks passed, Eleanor's health faded. She spent more time by the window, watching the Atlantic's endless dance. The world moved on, but her impact lingered. Marcus was disbarred, his accomplices under investigation. Her foundation thrived under new leadership, guided by her final letter. Daniel's articles won awards, and he dedicated them to her. One quiet evening, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger, her legacy intact. At 96, she'd proven age was no barrier to justice. As she closed her eyes, the ocean's song lulling her, she knew her story would live on, a beacon for those who dared to fight.